So, in today's episode of Does It Brian May, and perhaps the last guitar channel on YouTube to feature it, we're looking at the ToneX One. Now, does it Brian May? Yes, absolutely does. Of course it does. Everything on this channel has been using ToneX more or less, sometimes the Fender, but mainly ToneX since it came out. And what's been great about the ToneX thing is that it allowed us for the first time to have amps in a digital modeling situation that we pick ourselves. Now, there has been the Kemper and there's also the Quad Cortex, but the two of those devices' biggest downfall is they're rather expensive, and their platform only exists in the Kemper units, which the head and the floorboard now, and in the case of Quad Cortex, in a very expensive floorboard. And where the real joy of ToneX has now turned out to be is that it goes and it works on the platform that best suits you. So in other words, it will work on the computer, it'll work on an iPhone, an iPad, I don't know if it's on Android yet, but it'll work on all of those. And then there's the pedals. Now, one of the most common questions I get on social media is about the original ToneX pedal. Oh, if I get that, will I have your sound, Tom? Or, you know, why don't you use it? And the answer for that is rather complex, and I'll refer you to my video from ancient times where I describe why I use a computer on stage. But the long and short of it is that, you know, Brian May sounds rather complex on stage. And the way he does it, he has 3 Vox AC30s nowadays and a rack unit and all sorts of gadgets to cover a lot of different sounds. At its core, his sound is a treble booster, destroying a Vox AC30, but there's lots of other sort of accidental points of the tone that you kind of need to do that gig particularly well. And I like things like having harmonizers and having different types of delay. But also, I play a lot of festivals. And when I play a festival, I don't always get the sound check. Actually, 9 times out of 10, I don't sound check, and I just have to put my rack unit with my guitar stuff, software running up on the stage, DI it, and just get a level check. So when I run a chain out of the computer, it has all of the EQ cuts and everything done so that the soundman really just has to turn the thing on and it sounds good. And that is not just festivals. Like at any other gig, you don't want to monopolize the sound check. I want it to sound good out of the box. So in addition to having some amount of equalization done to help the sound engineer get there faster, I also have a separate channel for my monitors so that you know, I have different cuts in place to be able to make my monitors give me the best possible sound, so I'm not foostering or playing around with it throughout the gig. Anyway, I digress. The pedal hasn't been for me because I would have to buy sundry other pedals, all sorts of things to figure out how to manage buffering and all that sorts of nonsense to split up the sound, harmonizers, chorus pedals, EQ, and numerous DIs to try and get what I have now in a reasonably simple sort of setup. The only thing that would make my life easier right now is if IK Multimedia made AmpliTube 5 run on an iPad, because then I would show up at a gig with literally the iPad, the interface, and the controller pedal, and that would be me done. Digression again. The pedal is not for me because I will need much more, and I would need so many pedals. The whole thing would just be very expensive and very heavy and have multiple points of failure. Now, why does the pedal exist? Well, guitarists love pedals, and it makes sense because our perception of the pedal is a rugged unit that it just does what it does, and we can always rely on it, and it's there in our chain, and we can see it, we can touch it, we can, you know, control it during the gig. And I get that. I'm past that now personally, but I understand that people use those use pedals still, and that, you know, even though I don't really bother anymore, on occasion I do drop one into the chain, depending on what I'm doing. But I don't think I'd ever like to gig with a big, huge pedal board to try and cover all the things that the computer does so much more easily for me nowadays. So rather than talk about what this thing isn't, let's talk about what it is and why it's useful. This pedal is a social revolution. And the reason why I say that is that for people that, you know, they're never going to bring their mobile phone to run their live rig or their iPad, this is another way into the ecosystem that costs very little. And I don't know what it's retailing for now, but it's under €200, I think, after tax. That's absolutely nothing for what it does, because ToneX has become so popular that the amount of content that's made for it is so vast. Now, I know there's another platform, and I'm probably going to get commented to death about it for not mentioning it, but there is also the neural modeling plugin, or profiling plugin, that's also very popular, and that's an open source plugin. And, you know, normally I would prefer something that's open source because it means that the level of access to it is quite low, but in practice, to use neural, you're still married to the computer, and there is a player coming out at the moment, and that player is rather expensive. So even though it's free software, It's not free in a practical sense to use it at a gig. Yes, that might change. But right now, if you want to get into the ToneX ecosystem, this pedal costs very little and it works really well. So yes, it does sound like Brian May, and that's the end of this, really. But I'll carry on a little bit just to explain a few little things that you have to be wary of. If you're building something that you want to use at home, I would say one of these and the delay pedal will cover most of the 70 sound of Brian May. So in other words, you put the delay pedal after this pedal and you'll get the left and right sort of thing for the Brighton rock bit. And then of course, if you want to grow out your rig, you could put a phaser pedal in front of it to get some of those other 70 sound. If you did want to go into the 80s thing, that's where it gets trickier because you need two of them because it only runs 1 amp at a time. So two of them in some way splitting the signal. But that's still a really cool rig. And to be honest, if I was touring around and I wanted a sort of a solid little pedal board rig and I had the space for it and somebody else to carry it, I'd probably have two of these, a chorus pedal and somebody managing the DI and a delay pedal, and that would probably do most gigs. As it is, if I was stuck at a gig and I had that in my guitar case, I could pull it out, sorry, and DI it, and I'd have a very usable sound. What you're hearing now, just to explain the crazy wiring it took to make this work, is the pedal going into a Y cable that splits left-right straight into the audio interface. Now, in the room, it depends on your speaker in terms of what way it's going to sound, and that's going to be a video that I'll come at again because a lot of people will try modeling, and if they plug it into something rubbish or less than ideal, shall we say, to monitor it, they're kind of polluting their sound and their perception of what the sound should be. And if you're going for modeling, good speakers, or the right speakers for the job, to be precise and to define what good is in this case, are utterly key. Speakers are not a feature of this one. This is just a raw sound. So if you have your headphones on, that's what ToneX sounds like in your headphones. If you have a pair of speakers, what I'm doing now, that's what it's going to sound like coming out of the speakers. Okay, so there is another use case for this though that's worth talking about, and this is down to this idea of the liberalization of having numerous amps. If you invest in one of the big platforms, except for Quad Cortex because it does have profiling, but if you were to get, say, a Line 6 Helix, some of the Headrush boards, or the one that I have at the moment, the Fender Tonemaster Pro, you are limited to the amps that are in it. Now, to be perfectly honest, I think you should always just buy one of those pedals if what you wanted to do is already built into it. You never buy these things and wait for an update that may never come. Buy it for what it is rather than what it ain't. I bought the Fender Tonemaster Pro because it did all the things I wanted to do out of the box, and without me having to plug things into it or get mad and try and expand it using its auxiliaries. But if, for example, I needed to include a deaky sound on that, if I did decide to gig that particular board, there's never going to be a deaky sound in the Fender Tonemaster Pro. It's so niche, you know, nobody's going to do that. And similar for Helix, those type of things aren't ever going to come into being. Similarly though, and one of the reasons why I stopped using Helix was I found it very hard to get that compressed Vox sound when that thing was, when the model of the Vox in the Helix was driven hard. And I found that I ended up using things like compression and stuff to kind of spoof it. And that's why I eventually moved to AmpliTube for my live stuff and now onto ToneX, because both of those software programs were able to reproduce that properly driven Brian May sound in the way that I hear it or perceive it. But now I could simply, if I still had a Helix, or if I wanted to take my Tonemaster Pro into something closer to my computer rig, I can get one of these or two of these and run them in the effects loop. Now, with the Helix, there might be a drawback with that insofar as that there could be a buffer in between your treble boosted sound and the effects loop sound where you might put that pedal, and it mightn't quite be right. I don't know, I don't have a Helix anymore to test it, but what I can say is that when I put that into the effects loop of the Fender Tonemaster Pro, it works really well, it just sounds great. So what we might do is we might switch to the Fender and have a look at that, but just to finish up on the pedal, and to go back to this theme of getting started with Brian May sound, if you really want a nice cheap rig and you have a good computer, or you have an iPhone, or if you have an iPad, then a great way into the ToneX universe is just simply to get a very good interface that'll work with those. And we'll look at that again. If you're not minded to do that, if you don't want to use those platforms for that, then this is the answer, this ToneX pedal. And quite simply, if you plug that thing into headphones, it sounds, obviously using my capture of the Vox AC30, and if you have an actual treble booster, of course. I'll show you one more thing actually just before I hop off that. I'm using a real treble booster here, but what we might do is we might use one of my captures that uses a built-in inline treble booster. So just to hear what that sounds like. So for someone that's just after getting a red special guitar or BMG or something like that, using those captures with that pedal will give you a very good sound straight out of the box. Just make sure you plug it into something decent, like a good pair of monitors, and something that's stereo as well, because there is a bit of stereo information there that you kind of lose if you were to just plug it into, say, a single monitor or something like that. So what we'll do next is we'll have a look and see what it does if you put it in the loop of a Fender ToneMaster Pro. So here's a sharp cut. Back on the couch again, and I've hooked up my Fender ToneMaster Pro with a gazillion cables to try and sort of show you how it integrates with the ToneX One. So basically, one of the things that really you know, made me go for the ToneMaster Pro as a sort of a pedal platform to have at home is it is a pedal platform. There's loads of effects loops, and the first two effects loops are my favorite thing about it because they're direct, no buffer, send and returns. So if you're using a treble booster, you can actually put them into it and kick the treble booster on and off through presets. That's very handy. With this, I've put the ToneX One in a effects loop that would be more buffered and traditionally used for traditional effects, and it actually still works very well. So what we'll hear first of all is this is just the ToneX One pedal in a signal chain on the ToneMaster Pro, the Fender pedal. And you see I still have control over the clean sound with the volume knob, which is kind of cool. So yes, we'll just rock something out. Okay, so look, that works. Here's an interesting thing though. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to send the ToneX One off to one side, and I'm now going to introduce an amp from Fender's own set, and it's another Vox AC30 obviously, except this one will have a bit of chorus on it. So we have ToneX on one side and Fender's own Vox on the other with chorus to get a more full sound. And if you listen to that, more of the chorus one. It's a lovely sound, it's just so rich and lush. Really love it. What was sort of interesting to me is that now we have one really good Vox AC30, which is the one we spent a couple of days in the studio trying to get into ToneX, and then we have the one that Fender spent ages on as well, and they're two very good ones, but they're very different, and that difference is giving a very lush sound, a lot more harmonic content, because when I gig with ToneX, I use the same ToneX profile for left and right. So this has now got me thinking that maybe what I should do is do another capture with a very different Vox AC30 and ToneX, just so I can get a sort of more, even richer sound. And this is great because, like, I mean, like even with the out of phase stuff, it's all there. I love it. It's great. So that works really well. So, I mean, like, again, like if I was just using the ToneMaster Pro on stage, I'd have the same Vox left and right. But now, because I can just get that little pedal, I can have a bit of difference. And that could make sense for somebody that, you know, has a Helix, say, for example, and they've got a nice Marshall Plexi sound, but they use two in a wet-dry configuration, that you could just use another Plexi sound off Tone.net and the ToneX pedal, put that into a loop, and you get just a lot much more richer sort of sound. big mistake a lot of people make with modelers is that they actually monitor them in mono. I think that's, you know, horrendous. I've worked very hard to keep away from that, because when you monitor in mono, like one single speaker, you collapse what's inherently a stereo speaker out of, or stereo sound or signal out of the modeler into mono, and that causes the top end to phase cancel and everything to sound very woolly and muffly and all that type of stuff. And if you think about it, even if you have a true signal or stereo signal monitoring, we have two speakers. If you're using two amps that are nearly identical, you know, you're not going to get diversity of sound, and you might actually get even more phase cancellation. So I think that's a good use of case for it as well, is just to create that diversity. So that's the ToneX One. It's great as a standalone unit. It's great for adding spice to your platform that has, you know, sounds ins and outs. What's it not good for? You still need to use a computer, so you're still going to have to learn how to use that, and no harm either. You should really have another audio interface just to be able to set it up, and that's fine. I think it's great, and it's going to be very helpful for a lot of people to get a good tone straight out of the box. So I hope that makes sense. It's a bit scatty because I'm kind of still playing around with the thing. If you have any questions about it, if you want something to be done with a bit of a deep dive, just leave a comment below and I'll get to it. Right now though, I'm going to spend the rest of my Saturday playing some guitar and driving my neighbours mad.